shame is not an emotion. Shame doesn't want to elicit us to move forward in any way. Shame wants to debilitate us.
Welcome to Fishing Without Bait, a lifetime without definitive expectations, where we help people explode into their lives through full impact mindfulness. The only entrance requirements are the honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to try, and if you have a few pixie dust sprinkles of those, you're on your way. Jump in the canoe, grab a paddle, and let the adventure begin. As always, I'm Jim Ellermeyer. I'm a behavioral health therapist, and we're joined today by a hope to be a good friend of ours from the state of California. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Bronwyn Schweigerdt, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. And I also have a podcast about anger. That's my area of expertise. So it's called
Anger.
Angry at the Right Things. Yeah.
Oh, you must be beating your doors down now because there's much of it in the world now.
I'm not sure there's ever been a time there hasn't been much anger in the world. But yeah, I mean, we hear a lot about it today. We're more connected.
It seems to be more expressed more freely today, and I've always felt that the only emotion that men felt that they could safely talk about or exhibit was anger.
Mm. Yes, I just talked about that actually on one of my podcast episodes. Did you hear that? Why men, well, yeah, it factors into why men feel more anger and display more anger versus women.
So tell us, what's good about being you?
Well, I love being a therapist. I don't feel like it's work. I feel like it's just, I do it for free, honestly. Um, but I've learned myself through the school of hard knocks. And that's, how I found myself becoming a therapist was actually a second career because I myself fell into a very, very severe depressive episode. And I desperately needed a good therapist, and I couldn't find a good therapist. And I remember thinking while I was sitting on the sofa in a therapist or two's office, like, wow, Bronwyn, you are barely functional right now, but I still think you might make a better therapist than this person. And that set me off to go back to school, get a second master's degree, and do what I do now.
Well, it's hard to take anyone down a road further, Bronwyn, than you've been yourself.
Oh, yeah, that's what they say. The best therapists have done their own work. And I believe that with everything in me.
So tell us a little bit about your background in your life and what got you from there to here as we speak tonight.
The first major depressive episode that made me go back to school to become a therapist, I now see in retrospect, was from my own suppressed anger during that time. At that time, it was suppressed anger mainly at my husband because we had just moved to a new city where I knew no one. My daughter was just starting kindergarten. My husband went off to work every day, and I knew no one. I had nothing to do. I had lost my job. Um, and I was terribly lonely. And I remember looking at him one night, just a few days into the move, and really wanting empathy. I don't know if I was crying. I don't remember if I said anything, but needing him to empathize and attune with me. And he didn't. And in fact, the look on his face was actually one of coldness, where he was withholding empathy from me. And I felt so betrayed, but I also wasn't aware of just how betrayed I felt. And that anger from the betrayal kind of went underground. I didn't feel entitled to say, hey, Steve, you need to empathize with me right now. Not prioritize your own feelings, because I know you feel guilty about this move and my subsequent loneliness, but you need to prioritize my feelings and meet me where I'm at. And I didn't have the wherewithal to say that or to feel entitled to feel anger at my betrayal. And so all that went underground, what I call disassociated anger, and created this monster depressive episode, which is pretty much most people's depression is suppressed anger or disassociated anger. It's also their anxiety, the same thing. So in retrospect from that and from my other major depressive episode that happened about a year or two later, I'm able to look back and go, oh my God, the solution is self attunement, being able to feel our anger, to not be ashamed of it, to not be afraid of it, but to connect to it and to channel it out of our body in a healthy way. Again, for me at that time, it would have been, Steve, I need you to attune to me. This is not okay. I'm so alone right now. And I feel even more alone when you refuse to attune to me. And I think he would have stepped up to the plate and done that, no problem. But he didn't know what the impact was on me. So, assertiveness is how we channel the anger out of our bodies, or a boundary, or accountability of some kind. And that's how we keep ourselves from getting sick. And if we don't do those things, we're going to get sick. So, depression, anxiety, but also, physical manifestations in our body. A lot of people get headaches. A lot of people have digestive disorders. That's a very, very common one. I myself have struggled with insomnia on and off for about 30 years, that I see now in retrospect again as a manifestation of my own disassociated anger at my father. Now I have a great boundary with him, meaning I cut him off. So, yeah, those things are how we protect ourselves and keep ourselves from getting sick physically and mentally.
I think betrayal is an excellent term that you used. And could you explain a little more or share with us how you felt that maybe not worthy or able to express that anger to your husband?
Yeah, I think I just didn't have the emotional intelligence to slow down and just say, you know what, Bronwyn, this is a betrayal. He is your partner, and you are not wrong to expect him right now when you feel so alone to keep you from feeling more alone. Like, this is a realistic expectation of a partner to have. And a lot of times we talk ourselves out of our own anger, because we were raised, again, more women than men were raised not to feel angry. That's bad. That's not what good girls do. Um, or we're going to maybe be abandoned by that person. We fear their abandonment. We fear they'll detach from us. And so we have all these things that keep us from being true to ourselves in that moment.
So, what I'm hearing you telling me is that you were looking for validation from him,
Yeah,
for him to say, yes, I see you're upset. I see you're very angry.
absolutely. And then, my husband and I have talked about it since then. And, one of his distortions was, oh, if I validate, it's going to make it worse for you, which could not be further from the truth. And you and I both know that. But I think there are a lot of people who really think that validation is going to somehow make it worse, because, it's hard to find people who validate. A lot of people want to talk us out of our feelings, or they want to like argue the other side. A lot of therapists actually do that, unfortunately, which is why I had to become a therapist, to find a good one. So, yeah, I think validation is key. And it doesn't, we don't need to agree with that person intellectually to validate them. I can say, Jim, I hear how frustrated you are right now when, this happened to you. I don't need to agree with you intellectually or assent to it wholeheartedly, but I can still validate, yeah, I would feel angry too. I don't blame you for feeling that.
Well, validating someone's feelings doesn't necessarily mean you agree with them, but
That's right.
it lets them know that they're being heard.
Exactly. And humans need to feel heard. And there's just way too much talking and very little listening.
Well, we often, as therapists, we often emphasize the importance of active listening, and I go over the core emotional concerns, which I consider a human bill of rights, Bronwyn. The right to be understood, the right to be listened to, the right to be
Yeah.
respected, the right to be treated as an equal, the right to be
Yeah.
given the benefit of the doubt and the freedom to decide. And I usually suggest to people, if someone's not giving them to you, what are they doing in your world?
Mm, that would be a boundary. Amen. Yeah. So I agree. If someone isn't listening to you, if they don't attune to you, but there's also people we can have psycho ed with. I have a really good friend that, I've been able to say, Kath, You always try to talk me out of my feelings, but what I need for you is to just resonate with my feelings. I just need you to feel them with me because what's shareable is bearable. And, she's improved on that. She's not 100%, but she sees that I'm right because she's human too. And I think intuitively she wants the same thing for herself. And, so there's people who are willing to hear us in that way.
Okay. So you mentioned that you went back to college and got another master's degree, and your first one, from what I was reading about your bio, was in nutrition.
Yeah. Hmm.
So say more about that.
Yeah. Well, where I'm at currently, which is so funny, is that I don't think people are going to change their nutrition one iota until they start healing their relationship with themselves. And that is because when we heal our relationship with ourselves, self nurture, food is self nurture, or it can be dissociation from our feelings, which is kind of the opposite. It serves these roles, and if we don't see that and put the healing of our relationship with ourselves first, I think people in the field of nutrition or dietetics are just wasting their time because until I actually love myself and want to self nurture, that's not really sustainable. There's people who go on diets and they stay on them X amount of days or months, but in the long run, it's not going to last. And yet, when I heal my relationship with myself, I naturally just want to eat better because I feel better. And it's part of my self nurture. It's part of my relationship to myself versus if I don't want to feel my feelings and my whole life I have filled that emptiness in my gut with food, you can tell me all the right things to eat and I might be able to do it for a short period of time. But that emptiness in my gut, man, that is way stronger than any intellectual knowledge or self will.
I keep hearing the word healing reverberating through your
Yeah.
conversation. I think
Yeah.
that's
That
very
comes
important.
first. And a lot of, therapists will, say, okay, well, try to change your diet, try to go and exercise and do all these things, and clients might do them for a week, but if they don't heal their relationship with themselves, we're putting the cart before the horse. And when I see clients do that healing work, they come to me and they're like, oh, I started shopping at a farmer's market and I started cooking these new recipes and they're super healthy and it feels so good. So I think we just need to get our priorities straight.
Well, one of the first tattoos I've gotten, you probably can't see it, is the words "I choose," which I consider
Mhm.
the two most powerful words that a human being can have in their vocabulary. That if it empowers themselves, you as a therapist know the self-defeating words: "I need to," "I must," "I'd better," "I have to," which gives you no choices. And if you understand and are willing to accept the consequences, then everything in your life is a choice.
Yeah, and that choosing, even in and of itself, gives us that agency, and that is very healing to have that relationship with ourselves because our our young selves didn't get to choose. We didn't have agency over our lives, and so to start choosing to be responsible for ourselves is powerful, and it is thereby empowering. I think a lot of us learned that we are responsible for other people. We're responsible for other people's feelings. And I like to tell my clients, you can believe you're responsible for other people and you will die trying, but you're not. And you are only responsible for you. And that's something we need to unlearn in order to choose for ourselves, in order to be empowered in that way.
Well, I often suggest that a person, I said, "What's your locus of control?" And they tell me something. I say, "Drop a hula hoop over your head, and your locus of control is what's inside that hula hoop around your feet."
Yeah, that's good. And a lot of people have never realized responsibility for themselves. And it's scary, honestly. It's scary. I think it terrifies a lot of people to think about being responsible for themselves. But once they start doing it, it's addictive. But that again comes from healing our relationship with our young self. I really believe that.
So, could you maybe walk us through whatever you feel comfortable with about your journey out of depression, out of that dark place? Which I'm a I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Quaker, and the Buddhists call depression the long night of a dark soul. Let's talk about your journey out of that long night.
Yeah, so that first depressive episode that I told you about where I went back to school, that wasn't super long, but it was very acute. But then I fell into another one when I was kind of at the end of the graduate school experience. And that one I do like to talk about more because that was very pernicious. So, what I attribute that to, and I break this all down on one of my podcasts where I talk about it all, but what I attribute it to mainly, not just suppressed anger like the first one, but actual shame. And, shame, I like to say, is a feeling, but it's not an emotion because I believe emotions want to elicit movement, just like their name, motion, emotion. But shame is not an emotion. Shame doesn't want to elicit us to move forward in any way. Shame wants to debilitate us. It makes us stuck. It shuts us down, and shame kills actually. And so the second depressive episode I went through, I took on other people's shaming of me. I didn't have a boundary around that. I wasn't able to say, hey, man, that's your shame, not mine. I just absorbed it from so many different people. A long, long journey of just taking the shame, taking the shame, taking it. And I absorbed it. I became so depressed. I was suicidal. It took years, but I will say what reversed it for me finally after many years. One day I went for a run when I was starting to feel better. And while I was at a stoplight, for some reason, I pictured my 10-year-old self sitting at the dining room table with my parents. And I pictured my dad, and he used to mock me pretty much every night from age 10 on.
Hmm.
And I pictured that. And I pictured myself, my adult self, going to young Bronwyn and saying, "Oh no, no, this is not our shame. This is his. Right now we're gonna put all that shame in this big cardboard box, and we are gonna return to owner and say, here you go, Dad. This was never mine to begin with. This is yours. Do with it what you will, but it's not mine."
I love what you're talking about. That there's a real short Buddhist story about the Buddha when he went around and they begged, and he went to this village and he knocked at this fellow's door and held his bowl out and asked him if he had a few scraps for lunch. And the person started screaming at him, telling him he used to be a prince and blah blah blah, and all the good things he could have done, and now he's sowing discontent among people. And the Buddha asked him one question, Bronwyn. If you were sending a package to someone and they refused delivery, who would that package belong to? And the person said, well, it would belong to me. And he said, the Buddha said, then you're sending me a package of resentment and hate, and I'm refusing delivery, therefore it belongs to you.
Mm. So that's part of boundaries is bringing order and bringing truth and light and structure. And, you know, for us to say as an adult to our young self, young Bronwyn, the shameful person here is the father, the adult who's mocking his young daughter. Like that's the shameful thing. What you were doing wasn't the shameful thing. It couldn't be, but that's shameful. And for us, and when we do that for ourselves, we're integrating. That's healing our relationship with ourselves is integration. And so I lead my clients on what I call integration exercises where I have them, meet with in that, exercise with their young self. And they either give back the shame to the parent or they say something like, young Bronwyn, what I need you to know right now is even though when your mom never makes eye contact with you, and it feels like complete rejection of you, I need you to know that that is 100% a mom problem and 0% a little Bronwyn problem. That is not a reflection of your value. That is a reflection of her sickness. And so when we do that, we integrate with our young selves and we say, I see you. And when I look at you, I don't see a shameful young girl. I see a precious young girl. And I see the good, bad, and the ugly, but it is a net good in my eyes. And I am pleased with you. And I want you to know that I have failed you in the past. And I'm sorry. I didn't know that I too have betrayed you and abandoned you. But I'm here now. And I'm going to stay put as long as it takes to win back your trust in me. And I'm going to be that trustworthy mirror that you have been looking for and needing your whole life, that gives you a true reflection of yourself.
So you're speaking to yourself with loving kindness.
Yeah.
I was listening to one of the podcasts that you did, Bronwyn, and you were talking about what drives behavior. And I particularly was interested in when you were discussing the difference between felt and active love and anger. Could you say more about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we hear so many people confront their parents as adults, and their parent will say, Jim, I always loved you. And you're like, well, that's nice that you felt love, but what mattered was that little Jim didn't feel the love because your actions were not loving. And in fact, there's no neutral territory for a parent. If that child doesn't feel actively loved through eye contact, through concern, through interest shown in him, in comforting him or holding him, then he feels hated. That's all there is. There's no neutral place. And so even though that parent says, well, I always loved you, it was active hatred that the child felt. And we really need to distinguish between those two things. Love or hate are not sentiments. They're not feelings that we feel in our bodies. They are our choices. There are actions. And there are a bunch of little choices and little actions that we make throughout our lives.
So there's a saying that says, your actions speak so loudly I can't hear what you're saying. I kind of think that that's what you're conveying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Please join our next podcast. We are continuing our conversation with Bronwyn Schweigerdt and her concepts as a therapist. And, as you all know, a free prescription, fruits, nuts, and vegetables, and unplug your television, and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest that you fish without bait. Do a kindness for yourself and do a kindness for another. Forgive yourself and forgive another. If we're all not God's children, none of us are. Till all are free, none are free. Namaste.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait.